Today I want to talk a little bit about oil lamps. Wintertime's coming, and of course up here in the Northeast we tend to have a lot of periods of time where we have short durations with no power. One of the things that we need to do as preppers is make sure that we have a means of power and light for when those times come. Oil lamps, of course, is the most favorite. But a lot of people don't really know how to take care of their oil lamps. We have a bunch of different kinds here that are available on the market that we're going to go over. One of them, of course, is the Aladdin lamp, which I don't currently have, and I don't anticipate purchasing in the near future. So that's not something that we're going to be looking at today. They take a little bit more in-depth taking care of. So what we're going to do, we're going to go over the basics. You have your lanterns and you have your lamps. Lamps, of course, are pretty simple. Basically what you have is, when you look at it real close, you're going to be looking at simply a lamp. You have your font, which is the part on the bottom, and you have your burner, and then you have your chimney on the top. With your lanterns, of course, you have your bottoms, which is also called a tank or a font. Then you have your burner, then you have your globe, and then you have your chimney up on the top. They all work on the same premise, the same way. But there's some things that you need to do to take care of them. We'll start a little bit here with the oil lamp. You have a chimney. Make sure you take very good care of these. They can be purchased for the most part by many mass merchandisers, but you want to make sure that it's kept clean all the time. To keep the dust off the outside, and you want to do this at least once a year. If you use it heavily, then you want to do it more frequently. As far as exactly how frequently goes, that all depends upon the frequency of your use. But you want to use a nice clean rag to wipe it out. Make sure you get all parts of the globe clean and dry, and before you light it afterwards, make sure that you let it set a while to make sure that there's no liquids on there. What can happen if you have any liquids left on the inside by way of condensation or anything else is you wind up with a cracked chimney. Sometimes it's hard to get stuff off, and you have to scrub a little bit heavier on that. But if you take good care of it, you'll always have a nice clean chimney to give you a good flame. What you have left is your font and your burner assembly, which is pretty straightforward. You always want to make sure when you're filling your font, by the way, that you always use lamp oil. You can get liquid paraffin. I don't like the liquid paraffin as well as the oil. It's a little bit different in makeup. There's a reason they call it oil. It's a petroleum byproduct. But when you're filling your fonts, you want to make sure that you leave a half an inch or so away from the top to allow for expansion. You don't want to overfill it, and never fill a lit lamp if you have like a lantern that has an external pot. But you have here, this is what they call a Queen Anne style burner. It's pretty simple, straightforward. If you do have any problems with it, you'll see right on the inside here, you have some tabs that you can bend back, and this whole top can be popped right a little bit here. There. This is your basic burner assembly. You'll notice that there are plenty of holes here for air to go through. Now these work as kind of like a vacuum, where you have your flame here, hot air rises, so it goes through the chimney, and it sucks oxygen through the bottom. So one of the things you want to make sure is that the area around your font in here is kept clean at all times. You don't want to have a buildup of dust in there. So you want to make sure that it's always clean, always ready to go. Sometimes this internal part here, a lot of models is smaller. You could end up with a lot of carbon buildup, and that will also slow down your flame, make it run cooler. You'll have an inefficient bite when that happens. These have much smaller little tabs on it. This is a little bit harder to take apart. With these cheap ones, you should never have to do this because they're cheap enough where you can, it's easier and much more economical to just go out and make sure that you have 3 or 4 of these lamps on hand with a good supply of fuel. And speaking of fuel, these lamps, even though they recommend that you only use official lamp oil of whatever brand they're pushing, you can actually just use straight kerosene in these. These are what they were designed to burn on, as it used to be called in the old days as coal oil. Get this thing off here. And you have basically what you have is your tube that your wick will go up and down on. This particular piece here, you'll notice if you look real close in here, there are a couple of slots. This wheel goes right in there, and that actually lowers and raises the wick to whatever you need. But it's a pretty simple little tool. It's got a lot of benefits to it for the ease of use. So they're pretty easy to take care of. Usually what happens if you find that your wick doesn't go up and down, you got a couple of problems that can't always be repaired easily. Number one, either you put the wrong size wick in, or you've got one that's either too thick this way or too thick this way, too wide. Or what happens a lot of times is these little wheels on here, if you have a really cheap model, after a period of time they're just simply pressed on. If you have a lot of resistance against it, after a while they'll wear out and they'll just freewheel around there. But that goes together right in like that. And by the way, once you take these apart, they're not easy to get back together. So you have to really pay attention to what you're doing to make sure that everything gets back together the way that you want it to. And this type of burner, by the way, is called the Queen Anne burner. I'm not really sure what the details are behind why they call it a Queen Anne. I'm not that much of an oil lamp aficionado. However, I do know that it's the most popular type of burner on the market today. Works really well. We've had power go out several times here where I live, and I've never been in the dark, except for when I want it to be. But after you've got it all together, you can simply crimp those back down. And by the way, I would recommend strongly that if you're not mechanically inclined, that you don't get into these things in this depth of coverage and repair. If you got plenty of time to kill and you don't mind, having a hard time putting it back together, that's one thing. But a lot of times you may be in a situation where you might decide to do that when the power's out, and then you're going to have some problems. Wicks, you want to make sure that you have a wick that fits. They come in several different sizes. This package here that I got comes with a package of 5, and they're 1/2 inch width. You see that these here are 1 inch or 3/4 inch widths. So this is not the right one to use for that. But that's how they come. You can also buy wicking in rolls, usually 36 inches long. You want to make sure when you put a new wick in to always cut it straight and level, like so. Feed that up through the bottom of your wick tube, and you'll have to push a little bit until it engages upon that little screw that turns, and go up and down a few times to make sure that it fits good. Screw that back onto your font, and see, this is what you have. Make sure you wipe up all the spilled oil for safety's sake. Also wipe off your wick tube and your whole burner assembly to make sure that there isn't any stray oil floating around. And I'm going to turn the lights off to demonstrate a little bit more as to what this can do for you. Basically what you want to do is light your wick like that, and what you want to shoot for is not a high wick flame like that, which gives off a lot of soot, but you want to have a flame that looks pretty much just like that. Put your chimney over it, and we'll turn off the rest of the lighting. And I don't know how well you're going to be able to see that, but you turn down low so it looks like that. You notice that it's almost straight across. You can actually cut your wick so that you can make decorative flames with it, but this basically is what you want to have. This is at your low, and this is at your highest. This is going to consume, obviously, the most amount of fuel. When you get done with your lamp and you want to turn it off, all you do is turn it down to your lowest setting, and you simply blow across the top, and you're in the dark.